Almost everything we think we know about drug enforcement, about addiction, the opioid crisis, legalization, everything we think we know is wrong.
When you ban drugs, destroy the sources, police the streets every day, drug dealing does not go down.
The murder rate actually goes up.
What if the script we know so well was about keeping us safe, and it was all based on a lie?
Welcome tonight. It is such a pleasure to be with you all. I'm Laura Turner, for those of you who don't know who I am. And I've got to say, for someone who works in television, it is so hard to be informative, long form and engaging, entertaining at the same time. But that is exactly what The Fix was it not? Just an incredible film and so impactful and taught us all so much. Before we bring Johann in, I want to acknowledge the land on which we broadcast from tonight and the Boon Wurrung people, elders past, present and emerging. We have about 600 people in the audience tonight, as I'm sure Greg has pointed out, people from the AOD sector, people who might have come just to learn something tonight about drug law reform, and of course, people who have been touched by tragedy, losing someone through addiction, or who might have been addicted themselves, and much respect to those people. If you don't know my story, I am one of those people, and that is why I've become involved in this incredible cause to change drug laws in Australia. And of course, the man himself, the man we all want to hear from. Let's not waste any more time. Johann Hari, you have been touched by tragedy as well. Welcome tonight, and thank you for being with us.
Oh, hey, Laura, and you should be really proud of the work you're doing. And I'm so excited to talk to everyone. And I love Australia. I was saying to you before, I was almost said, how great is Australia? But then I realized I would sound like Scott Morrison, so I stopped myself. But
that's so last week.
It's also a slightly weird experience hearing we could hear the feed of the documentary before we were coming on, and I cannot tell you how strange it is hearing Samuel L. Jackson say the words that you have written. Like it's like weird where you wake up and Samuel L. Jackson is doing your voice, but not really. I did really want to ask Samuel L. Jackson to record my answer phone message,
yes.
But every two, I couldn't bring myself to ask him in the end. I was like, no, it's too disrespectful.
Can I ask you, Johann, the first thing I thought when I watched was, how did you get him on board? I mean, what a voice to have narrate your work.
Yeah, this is a subject he really cares about. And it was really the work of the amazing producer, Jeremy Yahez, and the amazing director, Jeremiah Zagar, who are just the most, Jeremiah's brother had a very bad addiction problem. Like so many people come to this subject in grief and find hope because these deaths are preventable. This is what's so emotionally challenging about this subject, but really energy giving, is that this is subject. I met so many people in the United States, in Britain, in Australia, who lost someone to addiction, who, if they had lived in Portugal, if they had lived in Switzerland, it's extremely likely that their relatives would still be alive and having good lives. So in one way, that's enraging for all the obvious reasons. In another way, it's incredibly life-affirming, because there are so many problems in life. Well, I don't know what the solution is, I don't know what the solution to the conflict in Syria is, right? Of course, we should help the refugees, but I don't know what the solution is. There are some problems where the solution is really hard, like the climate crisis, right? There is a solution, as you will have noticed, that your country did burn down relatively recently. There is a solution, but it's huge and it's going to be a really hard fight. We've got to fight it, but it's going to be really difficult. This actually, in many ways, is not like that. There are very straightforward solutions that you can explain to anyone on the street in 5 minutes that don't, of course, they're not magic bullets. There's still problems in Portugal and Switzerland, but that radically reduce the problems and radically help empower people to turn their lives around. So that, to me, is really empowering, because if we win this, we can really change huge numbers of people's lives. And I believe it is winnable in the medium term.
Johann, knowing that Melbourne, where this is premiered tonight, can be a conservative society. I mean, we opened our first safe injecting room not so long ago, a few years ago now. And we have made really good steps forward, but we have an opposition that is very, a political opposition, which is champing at the bit to shut that injecting room down, to, wage their war against drugs. We tread a fine line between going one way or the other. So knowing that this is the environment in which your film is showing tonight, how does that make you feel? I mean, you must be pretty proud to have it up there for a community that can be quite divided on this matter.
Yeah, well, I'm also conscious that Melbourne is going through like a really big tragedy at the moment, because the last episode of Neighbours was just filmed, and I just need to know that my thoughts are with you all. Although the fact that it brought Guy Pearce,
I think the British might be a little bit more upset, but anyway.
It's the closest I've ever had to a religious experience in my life is when I visited the set of Neighbours. So, but no, like,
did you go on the bus with the clouds?
Oh yes, yes.
You're a tragic.
I was literally in a state of like rapture. So I think, interestingly, I think Australia is one of the places in the global chain of the drug war that could break for all sorts of reasons. I think you're absolutely right that there's obviously this big struggle, and I want to give a huge shout out to all the people who live near the injecting site, people like Judy Ryan, who could so easily, lots of parts of the world, they see addiction problems and they're like, get these people out of here. Instead, people like Judy and all the people who live there were like, why aren't we helping these people? It's incredibly moving and profound story what happened in Melbourne. And
can I interrupt you quickly? I know Judy is in the crowd tonight, and we need to congratulate her because she did win a Queen's Birthday honour. So Judy, I hope you've got those wonderful glasses on and that red lippy, and you're standing there in your element. Congratulations, Queen's Birthday honour. Well done. We love you.
Huge love to you. I can do my impersonation of the Queen. Congratulations. I can't do it. I don't do a miserable face. But Judy's done incredible work. So I think within Melbourne, so it's tempting when you're arguing about safe injection sites, and I think people in Melbourne were 100% right about not falling for this temptation. The temptation is to talk in terms of the numbers, right? So the evidence is completely overwhelming from all over the world. Every single place where they open safe injection sites, deaths massively decline. People going into recovery increase because if you give them help, and of course, as they always say in Vancouver, where they opened the first safe injection site, dead people don't detox, right? So you massively save lives. Exactly. And you massively help people into recovery. So it's tempting to talk about numbers, statistics, say, look, you're just wrong about this. It's like arguing about global warming or something. But I actually think we have to go to a much more important thing, because I found when you have these arguments with people, and by the way, the people on the other side are good people, right? They're not wicked people. They're not.
Of course.
They're people who are, and the concerns they raise are not irrational or mad concerns by any means, right? And by the way, that includes people who've got people with addiction problems, in their families will be on both sides.
To just interrupt you for a minute, I'm sorry, but it does,
no, please.
And there will be people in the crowd who feel this way too. I was one of those people. So before I became, I never went as far as what we see some people, but in a way I was one of those people, because when I saw in the beginnings of my sister struggling, before I understood addiction, I would say, just stop. Why don't you just stop it? Just cut it out, do something else, just stop it. I had this, it's very black and white attitude until, it got worse and worse and worse. And I started realizing it's not, you can't just switch it off. And there's reasons why, it's not just this choice you make that people say. So, it's a learning experience that sadly for most or many comes too late.
I think you're so right. And I think everyone who has someone they love, who has an addiction problem, almost everyone has a kind of internal conflict where there's part of you that can see the person is suffering. Okay, this is a way of trying to deal with suffering. And I think we've got to be honest about it. Almost all of us have a kind of Harry Anslinger in our heads going, why doesn't it just stop you? What's wrong with you, right?
Yeah.
And even now, after all the work I've done, still I have that voice in my head sometimes with the people that I love, right? So it's not about we ever end that internal conflict, or indeed the external conflict, but it's about saying, okay, I think we have to, rather than arguing about the numbers or trying to make it into a scientific argument, which doesn't work, although the science is of course important, and rather than kind of externalizing the conflict, saying, oh, look at these bad people, I think we have to go to a much deeper moral and ethical question, which is, before we argue about the merits of injection sites, we need to say, okay, do we want these people to live, right? Do we want them to live? Do they deserve to live, right? Is a life where you remain addicted a life worth living, right?
Yes.
Now, clearly some people will recover, but some of them won't, right? And I remember Eric Sterling, who's a really fascinating guy. So Eric's, who I interviewed for Chasing the Scream, the book that was made into the fix. So Eric was he worked for the House committee in the US, where basically every committee, and when they pass a law, obviously, in the run up to that, there are lawyers who actually write the technical language for that law. And that was his job. He was one of the lawyers who wrote the drug laws for the United States from, I think, 1979 to 1989. And one day, at the height of the AIDS crisis, they bring in these experts to explain that if they don't do needle exchanges, there'll be a huge HIV epidemic and it will kill large numbers of people who are injecting drug users. And of course, Eric's sitting there being completely persuaded, going, God, we've got to have needle exchanges. And the experts leave and the senators sit there and go, well, is that a bad thing? I mean, we won't have any addicts anymore, right? And so, of course, that's stating explicitly a thought that is implicit in lots of people's minds. So we have to start by talking about, okay, do we want these people to live? And I think you only get to that story, you can only answer that question if you talk about specific people. Yes. I don't believe there's many people who would hear the story of your sister and would think, nah, don't want to, right? I don't think there's many people who would hear the story of Billie Holiday and think, you know what? It's good what they did to her, right? Yeah. That Billie Holiday had an addiction problem. Billie Holiday was horrifically sexually abused as a child, in fact, prostituted as a child, so raped by strangers for money. She dealt with the grief and pain of that by heroin. She also, by the way, became one of the greatest geniuses of the 20th century, reinvented singing, and became a complete genius, and was persecuted and hounded for her addiction and eventually killed because of it. And would have lived had she been alive today in Switzerland or Portugal, almost certainly. I don't think there's many people who, when they hear Billie Holiday's story, would go, yeah, let her die, right? So I think for that, we have to have a moral conversation and we have to talk about specific individuals. And there's not many people confronted with a specific individual rather than this abstraction, the addict. There's not many people confronted with this specific individual. Very few people in Australia. Australians are good people. There's not many people in Australia who go, you know what? I don't think we want this one, right? Not when they see the individual rather than the kind of stereotype cliche. There's an analogy I always think of that helped me with the people I love, where sometimes you'll get people who look at someone with an addiction problem and they'll go, well, I wouldn't do that. What a fool. Why? I wouldn't do that. And you want to go, right, to me, it's like looking at someone who was in a car crash, who had to have their leg amputated and going, well, who's this idiot who had his leg cut off? I wouldn't have my leg cut off. And you want to go, right, but you weren't in a car crash. And these people were in car crashes of the soul, right? They're in real pain. The core of addiction is about not wanting to be present in your life because your life is too painful a place to be. Once you understand that, it's about reframing addiction, and it's about talking about individuals, and it's about morally talking about, do we want them to live? Once you've done those three things, then you can go, and by the way, one of the things that will save that person is a safe injection site, right? Which, by the way, every people know, yeah.
With your analogy about car crashes, it's funny you say that, because I often think when people say, you know, they'll walk past someone in a laneway in Richmond and see them overdosing and, oh, well, they chose to do it, so they deserve to die. Or someone just collapsed and they don't know why, but they make an assumption and they keep walking. And I often think, if you saw a car crash, you would call an ambulance, despite the fact that person might have been speeding, or they might not have, they might have hodled up their car against the law, or they might have cut someone off and gone off the road. All things they chose to do. They still don't deserve to die. So And that's presuming that a drug user chooses, and that's, again, the other argument, isn't it? But I think it's this attitude we have towards people who suffer from addiction that we need to really shake. And it's
I think you're totally right, Laura. And I think one of the ways we do that, one of the reasons the film and my book are very much phrased as stories, not as arguments, framed as stories, not as arguments, sorry, is because if we look at the recent past, I think we give you an example of a person I know you know, and a completely extraordinary Australian, almost certainly the Australian alive today who has saved the most lives, probably the person in the history of Australia who has saved the most human lives. So there's a man named Dr. Alex Wodak. Alex is alive because his parents were Jews in the Netherlands when the Nazis invaded, and a Christian family hid his parents, and after the war they left and they got to Australia. And Alex became a very successful doctor. And in the early 80s, when HIV/AIDS first arrived in Australia, he was working as a doctor in King's Cross in Sydney, back when that was a really rough area, right? And so HIV arrives. This is the very early 80s. So it's quite early, people clock, it's a bloodborne, it's spread through blood and semen. So quite quickly, people are like, okay, we know what to do about, so they obviously figured out there were three groups who were particularly vulnerable. There were sex workers, there were gay men, and there were injecting drug users. And they quickly clock, okay, gay men and sex workers, we know what to do. We distribute condoms, we do education, they start doing that. But at that time, no one knew what to do about injecting drug users. There had never been any needle exchanges. I mean, a few people were having this idea at the same time in the Netherlands. But so Dr. Wodak, with the people who work with it at the hospital in King's Cross, start to say, well, we could just go around and collect the used needles and give people clean needles, right? And at the time, people say this is ridiculous. It'll never work. Addicts don't care if they live or die. You're not going to get them to think in the long term about the risks of some virus. This is a ludicrous idea. But Dr. Wodak was like, let's try it. Let's try it. Who knows? So, and I love that. I've always thought someone should make a movie of this, or any filmmakers in the audience get in touch with me because it's a great movie. So a coalition emerged in King's Cross. Basically, Alex could only persuade two people to do this. It was a Catholic hospital he worked at. So they were already working with the local sex workers with condom distribution. So they got the local sex workers and the nuns who ran the hospital to work together. So a group of nuns and prostitutes
love it.
Fan out across King's Cross. It's like a Baz Luhrmann film, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So nuns and prostitutes fan out across King's Cross, and they hand out needles. They collect needles, hand out needles, collect needles, hand out needles. And the police get wind of this.
Yeah.
And they say, this is a crime. You know, there were drug paraphernalia laws in Australia. You were not allowed to give people things that would then be used for drug use. This is a crime. They tell them to stop, right? And Alex explains to the police, but right, you understand that AIDS has arrived, right? Even if you don't care about them, this could be the entry point for AIDS into, because of course, injecting drug users have sex with non-injecting drug users. This could be the entry point for the whole country. We have to do this. And the police said, no, we've got drug paraphernalia laws. You need to stop. Big fuss in the media. Alex was demonized. You are enabling drug users. You're the junkie's friend. And then the police say, look, we're going to arrest you if you don't stop doing this. And Alex got called to a meeting with the Premier of New South Wales. And it's a big meeting. And they've got the Premier, they've got the health advisor, they've got a load of people there. And they say, look, you need to stop. You're embarrassing us. And Alex thought about his parents and the people in the Netherlands who hid his parents, who broke the law, right? They broke the law. And he said, there's times when you have to take a moral stand in life. There's times when you have to do the right thing, even if it will have terrible consequences for you personally. And he said, okay, you arrest me, put me on trial. I'll explain to a jury of 12 ordinary Australians why I'm doing what I'm doing. You explain why you want to stop me, and we'll see who prevails. Alex left the meeting, he got in the elevator, and behind him, the health advisor for New South Wales got in, and he whispered to him, whatever you do, don't stop. That project in King's Cross, along with the project in the Netherlands, was the first project to prove that needle distribution reduces HIV infection by about 90 to 95%, right? As a result of that experiment, needle exchange spread to about half of the world, including a lot of your near neighbors all over Southeast Asia, almost all of Southeast Asia. I mean, at a conservative estimate, that saved hundreds of thousands of people from getting HIV/AIDS, probably millions, right? As a result of this moment of courage on the part of Dr. Wodak, on the part of the nuns and sex workers of King's Cross, and the people with addiction problems in King's Cross who acted to defend themselves and their friends. I don't think there's many Australians when they hear that story who would say, you know what, I wish the police had put Alex in prison. Right. Alex is now, by the way, leading the movement for pill testing at music festivals. The next wave of one of the next waves of how we save people's lives on these questions. So I think with all of this stuff, when it's an argument, when it's at a level of abstraction, you can go any which way, right? And but when it's specific stories of specific people, they don't. The other side, and I don't want to say that to dehumanize them, don't have any success stories, right? There's none. You ask them, name me a country where we adopted your approach and we ended up with fewer deaths, less misery, more people having good lives. Occasionally, the clever ones will say Taliban Afghanistan. I mean, it's true. If you erect a horrific theocratic police state and you dedicate an enormous amount of police resources to it, you can reduce levels of drug use. And then the minute you stop having your horrific theocratic police state with 20% of the entire economy dedicated towards suppressing drug use, the problems come back much worse because people are even more traumatized. So they don't have it. If your only success story is the Taliban, that should tell you something.
Johann Hari, speaking of the other side, which we do, as you say, we don't want to dehumanize. In getting back to the fix, I want to play a little bit of the devil's advocate here. You discuss in the film at length that it's only so many people who really suffer from drug use, and there are many people who use drugs at festivals and whatever, and you're quite positive about drug use in the film. For a what can be a conservative society as ours, and whoever else will see the film, why did you choose to go down that path? I'm worried that they could use it as an excuse to dismiss all your work.
I really wrestled with this. I think it's such an important question, Laura, because it's something I changed my mind on in the writing of the book. So I was very focused at the start of the book, partly on finding solutions for the people I love who had addiction problems, but also for winning a more short-term argument. So I thought, okay, the way we're going to win this short-term argument and respond to those conservative forces that you're talking about, we have to win over, is to say, yeah, we all agree that drugs are bad, but we don't have a choice about whether people use drugs. That's going to happen. We can all see that's happening. So what we need to do is adopt the policy that causes the least harm, right? That was how I was thinking of it. And there were some people who persuaded me that actually that's not a good tactic. Amongst them, Professor Carl Hart, who I think people saw in the film. Also, by the way, literally the hottest man in the world. I'd like to think normally my interview questions are slightly, like when I listened back to the audio of my interviews with Carl Hart, I was so embarrassed that I was like, basically just giggled at every question he answered. It's like, it's all right, Carl. But I don't think that's, so I've got a bit of hay fever, by the way, sorry. I don't think that's why he persuaded me. Although I'm sure that's maybe 10% of why he persuaded me. But Professor Hart, he's the head of psychology at Columbia University, and I don't want to objectify him, not just the hottest man in the world, one of the most important thinkers on these questions in the world. I was just picturing him and got distracted. So he argued to me and lots of other people that's just not a good strategy, because what you're doing, they said you're conceding a big part of their argument, which actually isn't true, right? And that actually, in the longer term, what will work more will be to tell the truth. And everyone knows the truth about alcohol. Go into any bar in Melbourne tonight, and 90% of people there, more, will be drinking alcohol because it makes their life better, because they're having a good night, they're having fun, they're chilling out, they want to flirt with someone, they want to unwind after a difficult week, whatever reason it might be. And there will be 10% of people in that bar, for a bit less, who have an alcohol addiction problem. And we know that's not primarily because of the alcohol. That'll be because of things that have happened in their lives, right? Now, it turns out that ratio is true for most. It's slightly higher for some drugs and slightly lower for others, but it's around that bandwidth, as Professor Hart's work has shown, and other people. And so I wrestle with what you've asked, because it's a really important question. And sometimes I think, God, actually, we would win more arguments in the short term with that earlier argument.
I think you've answered it very well, though. I think, you have answered it very well by showing that we have to have the big picture. We have to have that honesty. Let's end it there, Johann Hari. Thank you. It has been so fun. You've enlightened, you've entertained, and of course informed, which is what we love that you do.
And I want to thank you for the incredible tribute you're doing to your sister, the life of your sister Sky.
Yeah, no worries.
You should be really, really proud of that. Also, Greg asked me, I just want to say as well, just one other thing, if that's okay, which is that Greg Chip and the people at Drug Policy Australia are doing such brilliant work. They're such admirable people doing such intelligent, thoughtful work. I really recommend everyone go up to Greg, ask him what you can do. And Greg asked me to point out that you can buy raffle tickets. I'll personally sign books and send them to you if you win the raffle. I'm just really proud to be associated with Drug Policy Australia. And all the amazing people in the audience, like Judy Ryan as well, who've done such great work in Melbourne. Australia has one of the best drug reform communities in the world, and I really think Australians are such decent and admirable people, and not morally judgmental dicks like some other countries. I really, you guys,
they're not dicks. On that note, let's go. Johann Hari, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Let's go back to the audience. Intermission now. Get your raffle tickets. Have a little drink, have some pizza, and go and visit those information tables in the foyer before the next big film. See you later.
Cheers, Laura. Really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. Mwah.
Drug Policy Australia is a fully tax-deductible charity. If you'd like to help save our young people from the harms of prohibition, please visit the donation page on our website. Thank you.